Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Scott Stedman podcast. I hope you are all doing great and having a wonderful start to your weekend. So, joining me today is Micah Current. Micah, how has your week been?
Just busy. When you said that, it made me really sad because we record these on Mondays. You're like, I hope your weekend's going well, or weekend's off to a good start. And I'm like, oh, it's still like 5 days away.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're doing good. Busy, wrapping up the spring term at Miami, and um, yeah, just trying to keep my head above water. A couple more weeks
Yeah.
till clear.
Goodness. Yeah, it's been my week's been pretty. I mean, it is what it is. We had a new experience. We did this past Sunday we had a regular 9 o'clock service.
When
Then
you say
11 o'clock.
experience,
Well,
I always get afraid of what you're going to say because of the history of stories that you've told.
oh man. Well, hold on. Don't sell me out just yet.
You just never know.
You do. So we ended up having a but at 11 o'clock, we decided to do an outdoor church, and there's this group called Wild Church, which really focuses on doing like an outdoor service. So it's like, okay, so we went out there, and we're out in the fields at a park, and people are kind of sitting in a circle. And, we had some hosts who were doing it. So it wasn't either me or the lead pastor running this, it was just a regular service. But man, it was nice. But there's like also a couple of things where I'm like, this is a bit different, maybe a little bit too different for my taste, but it was fine. I mean, everyone enjoyed it. It was a good time, and it was nice to just kind of be outside instead of being in a building. So it was great. Yeah. So today's topic that we're going to be talking about is how do we as pastors navigate life, or I guess I don't know how we would put it, navigate life or navigate jobs after we get fired or we decide to. Actually, no, if we get fired from a church, I think that would probably be more better because if you leave a church, at least you have options. But if you get fired from a church, then you're kind of in a weird spot. So we're going to talk about being how to navigate life or navigate after life after being fired from a church. But before we dive into that, a couple of mail things real quick. So, and actually, all these comments, Micah, have been from mail or have been from videos before your time. Like it's wild how many new comments I'm getting on videos pre the Micah current age. How do you feel about that?
Leave me out of it, I guess.
Well, and they're interesting ones. So like one of the comments came from episode, oh, let me see what episode that was because I don't have them right here. Yeah, one of them came from episode 20. Episode 20, Micah, where
How
I
many are we
did a
up to
film for
now?
thought on the movie The Shop on Main Street, and apparently I was saying that it was a Czechoslovakian film. And someone corrected me and said it was just Slovakia, not Czechoslovakia. So there was that. And then the other comment we got was one that I did years ago. It was one of the ones where I did something about women and powerful stories, and it was actually the one I did about my mom, where she talked a little bit about just the abuse she suffered in the church and how she was able to kind of overcome that. And there was a couple people who commented on that saying how her story really resonated with their story. So, and I think that would have been episode 86, 87. I'd have to really look for it. But again, it's one of those older episodes that someone commented on. So, which is a good thing because that means people are interested in what we're saying. They're going, well, let's go back in the archive and see what these two people were talking about, or at least what was Scott talking about back at episode 1 or episode 2. Oh,
Star Wars.
goodness. Yep. So, um, being how do we navigate life from being fired from a church? And you know, Micah, I really don't know how to navigate this because I don't think I've ever been fired in ministry. All the times I've left a church job or a ministry job has always been on my own accord, and never was actually fired.
Yeah, I think the same too has been for me, and I was thinking about that as you were talking. I mean, we can actually steer the conversation in a way that it's like, what do you do after, you leave a church and ministry, and do you continue on in ministry? Do you not continue on in ministry? What does your
Mhm.
life look like, after that?
Yeah,
So
and I think it's
neither of
interesting.
us have been fired.
Well, it's interesting. Well, because here's the interesting thing. Because I think a lot of times with my role in ministry, I think the hard thing to always calculate in ministry, especially if you're a pastor of a medium to maybe even a small church, is how do you, how does the church, how does the church or church policy, I would say, dictate how we take care of a pastor when either A, they decide to leave, or B, if they get fired. Because, I've read so many bylaws where they have things like, oh, if a pastor gets fired and it's under what they would call, um, I don't know, like moral means, I guess. He got fired because this pastor got fired because, the church just didn't want them around anymore, or the church voted them out or whatnot. So, it's usually like, okay, we're going to give you um, maybe 30 or 60 days to vacate your office, or if you're living in a parsonage, you got 30, 60 days. And then we're going to go ahead and give you like 6 weeks severance or whatever they have it detailed. But then they also have a thing like, well, if you do something like was bad, like, oh, you went to prison or you were having an affair, you're embezzling money, then it's like, yep, you're gone immediately. No compensation, no nothing. It's just, you're dropped like a bad habit, pretty much. Um, and then there's other times where churches, they will be like, oh, if you decide you're going to leave, because we didn't fire you. So if you're leaving, that's it. That's your choice. So we kind of basically negotiate terms. Or it could be like, you know what, you're leaving, but we're going to go ahead and give you some type of severance package or some type of compensation package while you leave anyway, because, just to kind of help you guys out in your transition. If you have somewhere to go or if you don't have anywhere to go, we will try to navigate that. And I think that's always very tricky because a lot of times churches don't necessarily write all that stuff in their church policy, or it's very vague and it's really up to whoever your board of elders, your trustees, your leadership team is. So, I mean, if you have one that, maybe is really good, really on top of it, you could probably work out a pretty nice exiting deal. And then if there's people who don't want you gone, like they're probably not going to give you anything out the door. Doesn't matter if you were honorably or dishonorably left your position, like they're not giving you jack. And then it could also be the other factors. It could also be just the type of churches. If it's a smaller church that doesn't have much money, maybe they can't give anything. So you always kind of have that type of wrestling match that you're always dealing with. Kind of, I don't know, anything to add to that?
I think that like any sort of transition that I've made out of a church, I've always done it with integrity and, even though it wasn't easy, um, tried to leave the place better than I found it.
Mm-hmm.
Try to, hold my head up high, be the better person, and walk out the door when it's all said and done. Um, I don't know that I've ever been paid a severance package. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I know some people that have, but then the same thing with you know, the 30 days, 60 days, or if it's, I guess a crazy enough offense is it, you're fired on the spot, get all your stuff and get out of church. Um, which means, man, that could be something really, really bad. Like you were saying, jail, affair, what have you, embezzling money. And so Um, the um, the idea of one of the churches I work at, somebody embezzled money. I think I've shared
Mm,
that before on our show, but like, you know, he embezzled over $40,000 of the church's money and they had no idea.
mm,
But the pastor, extended grace. They prayed for them. They forgave them. There was a lot of healing in that moment, but they were no longer allowed to work there. Um, so anyway, yeah, just kind of like a brief thought. I mean, but then let me do this too. On the flip side of that, like I've worked in bigger churches too, where it's like, dude, you shouldn't have a job because of the way you're, handling your business or the way that you handle your volunteers or the way that you talk down to people or, XYZ, you just name it. And they're not, professional at all. And it's like, how in the world do you have a job and you're making this much money if
mm.
you're that rude and disrespectful to people?
Yeah.
So I've also seen that.
Yeah, it's wild. And sometimes I think the other thing that's wild is you could have people who maybe I don't know, like sometimes I think like you can clearly see it, or maybe some people don't see it. You see something, and then all of a sudden you kind of get to that point where you're just like, you know, we got to get rid, we have to get rid of this person because they're destructive. But then others times there's people who have a history of burning bridges, being destructive when they leave. It's just kind of a pattern, and all of a sudden it's like people still hire them because it's like, well, they either have a bunch of people who are big names within their denomination that support them or whatever the case may be. So you get to that point where you go, how, sometimes there's these people who could be embezzling money or could be very cruel or mean to their staff. And they could eventually get kicked out and then eventually they could get into another ministry job, and because maybe they're best friends with like the general director of the denomination or someone to hire up and they get a good reference from them, it's almost like, hey, we're just going to go ahead and we're just going to go ahead and hire this guy because they got a great recommendation, even though there's a whole bunch of stuff. um I think i think when a pastor does deal with leaving ministry, I think probably one of the first things that has to be done is to really feel the loss.
Mm.
Because I think a lot of times as pastors, especially since ministers don't get paid lots of money and may not even have like a good severance package or whatnot, like the moment you're gone from a church, you are immediately trying to find your next thing, your next adventure in ministry, or trying to find another job to help pay the bills or support your family. And there's not a lot of time to really say, okay, I need to really sit and mourn this loss. I really need to sit and grieve, because so much of ministry is people, men and women, pouring themselves into a church that they believe is benefiting a higher purpose or the kingdom of God or their denomination or their community. So when you leave that position, you're almost at a place where you have to mourn. It's almost like losing someone close to you, whether that be like a parent or a sibling or a child. Like there's something that was lost, and you have to kind of grieve that and really process that in order for you to heal that. Because a lot of times pastors can get fired or they leave a position, they go to the next one, and they're still carrying some of that previous baggage with them into the next place that they're serving because they haven't really officially mourned or grieved that loss.
I would say I'm guilty of that.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is that like when I was young in my 20s and I was a worship leader, if this church didn't work out, I went to the next church. If that church didn't work out, I went to the next church. If I didn't work out, I went to the next church. And I didn't really deal with the baggage that came along with um, why I was leaving the church. All I cared about was, oh, I got to pay my bills. Oh, I
Mm,
gotta, support my family or contribute to my family. Um, it's difficult because you never realize how bad it hurts until after it's happened. I mean, it can hurt initially, but like, you know, my wife and I were joking about it yesterday. We were on our way to the grocery store or something. And I was like, when did your anxiety start? Talking about mine. I was like, well, when I took a job at this church in this year. And subconsciously, I didn't know that was happening, but
yeah.
I believe that it heavily contributed to the fact that I now have a lot of mental health struggles.
Mm,
Um, and you know, I truly believe God is having me wait, and I don't know how to deal with that because I'm not patient at all.
mm,
I mean, I've been more patient since having a baby, but like what I mean by that is that like, okay, we went to this one church and I talked to the pastor and I'm like, man, I'd love to get connected. I'd love to get plugged in. I'd love to help do this, that, and the other. You don't have to pay me anything, you know. And I just feel like I was being ignored. And I'm like, well, don't they know that I have a background in this? And don't they know that I, can do all these things?
hmm.
And so we ended up going to a different church. Kind of the same thing happened, but it kind of clicked in my head that it was like, well, maybe God's making me wait for
Yeah.
the right. Um, and uh, you know, the church we've been going to is a Baptist church, and it's, very well attended. We have a really good senior pastor, and he and I have a really good relationship. And it's like, you know, he knows the background that I have, but I think he is intentionally waiting for the right thing to happen so that when he needs me, he knows that I'll be ready.
Yeah.
And so, but something else, if I could take it a step further, is
Yeah.
that like I was talking to my therapist during my last therapy appointment, and you know, I, I don't do super well with like the traditional style of worship and the traditional service and basically the same, worship outline every week. I like spontaneous. I like people to be really inspired during the service and, you know, not like full blown, you know, Pentecostal, but, um, somebody get excited, somebody accepts the Lord, somebody gives God praise in the middle of the service. Anyway, the church we've been going to is very, I would say, higher on the traditional end than anything.
Mhm.
Um, but I told my therapist, I was like, I'm okay with it. And she's like, well, what made you come to that conclusion? And I was like, well, we went, my wife likes it, my daughter likes it, we're comfortable. Like everything is just um, as it should be. And so like it doesn't matter if it's my preference or not. Like I'm not going to change it. And it kind of clicked in my head, Scott, that like it doesn't matter what church I go to. I'm not going to be the catalyst to change the church.
Mm,
And I think for so long, our generation, like coming up out of school and seminary and Bible college, XYZ, thought that we were just going to go into these churches and change the culture. When in reality, we probably should have just left it alone, and we would probably would have more longevity at different churches in the long run. And so I don't know, man. It's a lot of information, but like I would rather go to church and have a peace of mind and know that it's okay that I don't have to fix it because it's not mine to fix. It's God's first and foremost. Um, but yeah, It's encouraging.
Mhm.
It took me a long time to get there, though.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't
No,
know
I,
if you went through anything like that with transitions in ministry, but like it took me a long time. Like I
mhm.
was leaving different churches, trying to find the right fit, trying to find the right whatever. And, I was like, maybe I'm not doing the right thing. Maybe I should just step back.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, when I left my last ministry position, like I kind of made it a key point to go somewhere. And through our university, we have this retreat that you can go away. It's like a week intensive, like counseling, spiritual revival type thing that, they only accept like I think we had like 8 in our group. And just doing that, it was just like, okay, I got to meet with other people. We kind of got to share with each other about what we're going through, kind of encourage one another. Some people are dealing with divorces, some people are dealing with ministry challenges, some people are dealing with, you know, mental health struggles. But we came there and we had a night of worship. We kind of each kind of did our kind of like a group activity. But then we each had like our own individual counselor there that we would always meet with at least 3 times a day for 7 days. And I mean, it was one of those things where I would kind of tell stuff and I would share stuff, and you kind of and it was one of those things where you know in ministry, you're like, okay, it's like, okay, did I really screw things up? Was all the stuff that I did or say or I did was warranted to the way me and my family were treated, or like was it justifiable, or was it not? Like was I not the problem? And it was always good to just have that moment to talk to somebody and just kind of maybe get out of your head a little bit and try to really see things from a different perspective, but also have someone there who also kind of goes, yeah, kind of what happened is not your fault. Like that's not on you. That was on them. So I think that was kind of good too. And then, as I begin to kind of pull back a little bit more, you then kind of see a little bit more of the picture after you've kind of had that moment of healing, had that moment of kind of really seeing things and really taking that time to grieve. Then you can kind of see, like, okay, like, you know, in the grand scheme of things, this was the best decision for me and my family, because now we're somewhere better, or the church is in a good place because they actually have somebody that can meet some of their needs that I was not able to meet because of my skill set or my talent or just my commitment to other things, or at that point the church kind of really got to a point where they were really able to prioritize what is the most important thing that we need as a church. And maybe it wasn't just having someone be out in the community all the time trying to bring people in. Maybe it was more of doing this ministry or doing this or doing that. So there's just a lot of stuff to really kind of navigate. Yeah, so I think the next question you kind of brought up in this topic is the idea of, like, okay, well, where do you go next? Like, when do you decide I want to try to do ministry again? Or you kind of say, you know what? I think I'm done. I don't want to be a full-time worship leader, children's pastor, youth pastor, lead pastor. I don't want to do any type of church job. I'm going to do something more in the um, do more of a worldly job than a ministry job?
Um, that's a really good question. Because I basically lived it over the last couple of years, and I I would come home, at the peak of my, and you could probably speak into this too, Scott, because of during the time of your last role, but like the idea that you're mentally just drained, but you're angry, And those two things together are just not healthy and not good. And so, um, I remember getting home late at night and my wife's like, well, what took you so long? And, I had to explain to her that, I had to wait on them. And it's like, the church is 45 minutes from the house. And it's just, you know, they lollygag around. They don't consider my time or my feelings or my family or my situation. And, so basically, long story short, like I just would come home and I would say, I don't care if I ever work in a church again. If I can find another job and do something else, I don't care if I ever work in a church again. And I think I got to the point where I really meant that because I was struggling so bad with the approval of my peers, of my colleagues, of, people in the church. It just got to be too much. And so um, I ended up just kind of when it, let me back up. The first full time, or not the first full time, the last full time ministry assignment that I had just wasn't healthy for me. And so I decided to step out. They asked me to give them 30 days. I did. I was asked to be an interim. Um, I was asked to be an interim at a Baptist church as a worship leader, super part time, but it was during the pandemic, and my wife and I weren't going anywhere anyway, and she was making decent money, and we were fine. Um, so the idea that it wasn't healthy, and then I was able to kind of you know feel a sense of healing in this Baptist church to lead people every week because like I, literally as an interim, you've been an interim before, like you go in, you don't make any decisions, you just show up, do your job, and leave, which is what I was asked to do. I was asked to lead worship. I was asked to put services together and run rehearsals and sound check on Sunday morning and run the service, and that's it. And so, we get to the point where I get done with that at the end of that year. And I was like, I think I'm just gonna give it a break for a while because I just don't feel I need to recharge my batteries. I need to just go to church with my wife. I need to, maybe not go to church this week or next week. Um, watch it online. But all that to say is that I think there's validation in the fact that you can say no to things because if you let it, it will consume you.
Mhm.
I said a lot.
No, no, I mean, no, it's all good stuff. And I think, I think a lot of times our capacity to make that decision really kind of goes to the point of, you know, is ministry the best fit for me? Like, and what I mean by that is, Micah, you mentioned earlier that, maybe part of the reason why maybe we just kind of have to stop trying to think like we can change everything or change the world or do that. But, you know, part of the challenge with that is, my experience is you've had a bunch of older ministers, Christian teachers, both on a regional to a national or worldwide scale, talk about we need young ministers to be called to the ministry. We need you to kind of help change the trajectory and shape the new policy of the church so that we can be more relevant to reaching the next generation for Christ. So you hear all this branding messaging within the church and within church conventions and everything else. So maybe I'm someone who loves youth group. loves going to church, and I'm going to these conventions, I'm going to these camps, and I'm hearing the same message. And I have even pastors or youth leaders going, "Oh, you'd be a great leader. Maybe you should be a pastor. Maybe you should be a pastor." Then you go, "Okay, maybe I should be a pastor because I'm hearing this messaging." So then I go spend my life going to Bible college, training to become a minister, going through the ordination process, going to seminary, doing all this stuff. And then I start getting my first pastorship job. I start going and doing stuff in ministry, and come to find out, maybe maybe I'm not good at it. Maybe I'm horrible at being a pastor. Maybe my calling should have been in something else, but because I kept hearing this messaging, I went into ministry. And now I'm somebody who has been burned out in ministry. I feel like I have done nothing good in any of the times I've been a pastor. So then where do I go from here? And I think when someone's in that predicament, it's always that idea of do something that's outside of ministry to clear your head, to kind of get outside of that bubble, but then do something that you love to do. I mean, I heard when I was doing counseling, when I was training to be a counselor, and one of the things that I remember hearing a message that there's this guy who used to be a former alumni, and he shared a story about when he went through the program. He told his advisor, "I want to do the type of counseling where I can make the most money." So the type of counseling was corporate counseling. So he graduated, was part of a big, gigantic corporation. He was a counselor at this big, gigantic corporation. And he did that for about 5 years and hated every single day of his life doing it because it just irked him just hearing these people who are in these successful careers talk about all this negative stuff or whatever. So he worked there for 5 years, saved all his money, and then he left. I guess kind of semi-retired, but he left, went and bought a house somewhere like I forget where. He bought a house somewhere by a beach, and he makes boats for a living, and he sells boats. He makes and sells boats, and that's what makes him happy, and that's what he's doing for the rest of his life. So he spent 5 years doing corporate counseling because he wanted to make the most money and absolutely hated it. So now he did something he loves to do, and he's very successful at it. And I think, kind of to your point, Micah, is sometimes you have to make that decision of maybe doing something else, maybe just to get away. And then, as the time comes, as God calls you, maybe calls you back into the ministry. You have that time to heal, you have that time to process, you have that time to kind of be refined as a different type of minister, a new minister, and then you're able to go back with a better picture, a clearer head, maybe more guardrails to really help you thrive in ministry. Then there may be other times where it's like, you know what, I'm fine with being in a volunteer basis, but I really enjoy, making boats on a beach, or I really enjoy working in an administrative office doing administrative tasks because I feel like that I'm thriving in that. Or I like doing it because it's work that I don't necessarily love, but it's not bad, and I'm making good money, I'm getting good benefits, and I'm able to support my family, and that's really what matters to me at this moment. And you're doing that. So, any other stuff to add on to that? My thoughts, Micah?
No, I think we've kind of hit a lot of it, but I think it's knowing your limits
Yeah.
and taking care of yourself. And it doesn't even have to be the church.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can be in the business world, you can be in, like you said, that guy was doing counseling, now he's doing boats. Like it could be any profession, and if you're miserable in it, don't do it. It didn't make any sense to stay somewhere where you're miserable.
Yeah. And I think kind of like my last final thought is, if you do get fired from ministry, whatever the case may be, let's say it's for non-justifiable means, meaning that you didn't embezzle money or did anything bad. You just got fired because basically the congregation didn't like you, or someone had a stick up their butt or something like. And like said a coup or whatever the case may be. When you go through that, the one thing to always remember is your time in ministry is never a failure. And I think that's kind of important because we can go through a bad stint of ministry, and whether we leave or whether we get fired or whatever the case may be, there is that thing of like, oh, well, I failed, or I messed up a lot of people, or I did that. And, if you did something bad, that could be. But if you did nothing wrong and you're feeling that, just take heart that you did nothing wrong. You're not a failure. And, maybe that few moments you were there at that church, there was at least some good you did, right? And, and I think that was kind of always the hard part, because sometimes, you could leave a church and you really don't know the good you did. Even when I was an interim and I would, travel to churches all the time, I maybe be at this church for a month, or maybe be at this church for 2 months, or maybe be at this church for a couple weeks because pastor was on vacation. And you kind of get to that point. It's like, okay, did I do anything to help this church or to help them out with whatever dysfunctions or trials that they were going through? And, you always have to kind of go, if God called you there to serve, to use your skills and talents to do what needed to be done there, then everything you can say is a success, right? Whether someone came to the Lord while you were the pastor there, or maybe 5 people left the church, but you had couple people, 2 people that joined the church while you were there, and those 2 people are still there after you left, and they're probably one of the most gracious, best volunteers that church has ever had. Like those are the type of victories that you kind of have to need to take with you, and not worry about some of the losses, but think about some of the gains that you've had when you're in ministry.
Yeah.
All right, friends. So hopefully this is helpful. I don't know if you're someone who's listening to this. If you're like, hey, I have a buddy that I know who's going through a rough time in ministry, just lost their job or just left and are kind of floating right now, send them this podcast. Say, hey, you listen to this. Maybe this might encourage you. If you're someone who's in that, and if there's some good advice, if you would have any good advice that you would like to leave for another pastor, feel free to leave it in the comments. Because again, we at Scott Stedman Podcast just wanted to encourage each other. So if that's something where, you can have some advice that someone told you, or maybe you kind of have a different outlook on things that can kind of help encourage people who may be in the season of leaving the ministry and not sure if they want to get back in the ministry, then feel free to leave a comment or email us at our website, thescottstedman.com, and we'll read those comments on the air in our next episode. All right, friends, thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll talk soon. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Scott Stedman Podcast. The Scott Stedman Podcast is made possible by support from our listeners. We thank listeners like Patty and Scott, whose support goes to this podcast's continual growth and maintenance. If you want to support this podcast, you can do so in a number of ways. First, feel free to give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed this episode and share it with your friends. If you'd like to financially support the Scott Stedman Podcast, you can go to the website ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman Podcast. That website again is ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman Podcast. Thank you so much for listening.